I was in Brazil in 2003 for the Abu Dhabi World Championships.
What is a genius?
My next book should have been out a year ago.
A genius is someone who dares to think outside the box.
Just want to make this very clear. Eddie Bravo is an idiot.
An inventor and creator.
I wasn't planning on doing my own show.
Someone who can ask questions and not take because it's tradition as a valid answer.
I think there's like a kind of like an internet code about him, you know, they call him the master.
But Jiu-Jitsu always had a core, a family, a tradition.
Large percentage of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community, they don't want anything that I do to succeed.
The Gracie name was always seen as the golden standard of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Their influence came from legacy, reputation, and lineage. That same lineage determined the real Jiu-Jitsu.
If you ever want a black belt from me, you got to at least have this down.
But what happens when the family who adopted the sport into existence, who held tradition as sacred,
Been painted out as a bad guy of Jiu-Jitsu, and nothing could be further from the truth.
meet an innovator who won't simply comply with everything he's been told?
Knowing what I know about the Gracies, knowing what I know about the history of the family, the idea that you were going to fight Royler Gracie seemed so crazy to me. My best friend standing there with Royler Gracie and you guys are about to grapple.
A pocket in history holds the answer to this question. Inside a gym in Brazil, the world will be forced to question whether the rules and systems of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are as set as they seem.
A friend of mine said, man, you should walk away from that job and open up a school, man.
But once you learn how to do it, you save your life.
In one corner was a product of tradition, a living example of the old ways. Across from him was an underdog challenger
How about when you alright? Your knee go out?
Yes.
with little besides a curious mind
DMT is the fuel to the afterlife.
and a playbook no one had ever seen.
Yeah, he figured out some very unique ways to use his legs.
However, before we reach that mat, we must go back to Southern California
There's a marijuana code.
to meet a teenager only interested in guitars and metal music.
I didn't want to be a fat rock star.
Back to a kid who never imagined living out a martial arts plot from the movies that he loved so much.
I could do MMA if I was forced to.
Edgar A. Cano was born on May 15, 1970 in Santa Ana, California. Now, if you're wondering who the hell is that, that's a valid question. Little Edgar Cano didn't like that his biological father was never around, so he chose to legally change his name to Bravo, which was his stepfather's name. He grew up poor with two siblings. His mom had to take care of all three of them with just $150 per week. His biological dad never really found time for him, as he was really busy in the baby factory. Seriously, that man had 18 other children. Eddie's early interests did not fully align with the standard jiu-jitsu athlete's teenager years. Although he did play football and joined the high school's wrestling team for 2 years, outside of that, I bet no other BJJ pro born before the 2000s can name you one single Iron Maiden song. Eddie could, because he was obsessed with rock and metal music. He loved Kiss, Motley Crue, Exodus. Slowly, his love for music turned into a passion and a drive to create. So he joined a band with his friends and started to write his own songs, play his own riffs, and even set up their own concert. However, sadly, nobody showed up, which distressed him a lot, enough for the band to break up. But he did find relief in speed metal. Along with his friend Matt, they formed their own speed metal band, and Eddie would swap the guitar for the drums. But speed metal didn't hold Bravo's attention for long. His creative mind was itching for something else, something new. What really brought Eddie closer to his match in Brazil was Anthrax and Public Enemy Bring the Noise, which is a song that mixed rap and speed metal in one badass track. That immediately got his hooks into Eddie. It gave him a real idea of what he wanted to do. So in 1991, he moved to Hollywood, California, sold his drums, and switched back to the guitar. He was going to expand on the one-off collaboration, form a band around the idea called Black and Kill Symphony. His friend James would rap and Eddie composed instrumentals and added vocals. Eddie really went all out on the idea. With stars in his eyes, his mind was already showing flashes of the band rocking out in packed arenas with fans screaming and thrashing. And of course, you can't be looking like a slob while performing on stage for thousands of fans. So Eddie joined the gym. It took him a whole of 2 gym visits to realize that his mind, which was bursting with ideas and creativity, couldn't handle the mundane nature of weightlifting. So he looked back on the movies that he loved as a kid and knew exactly what he'd do to stay fit. Being a gigantic Bruce Lee fan, he took inspiration and immediately signed up for karate class. One day, while hanging out, his bandmate, James, asked Eddie if he'd seen the new UFC 2. At the time, people were skeptical, not sure if the UFC was real, as people were used to the WWE, which is scripted. But James reassured Eddie that it was in fact real, and that the weirdest thing had happened at the event. A small dude in pajamas had choked everyone out, even the karate guys, and some giants too. Royler Gracie had beaten everyone to become a UFC champion for the second time. Although Royce was a tiny man, he beat giants using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the art that forced its way into the fighting world. Eddie was pissed at first because he loved karate and kung fu, but he immediately knew karate wasn't it for him. He had to go out and try some of this jiu-jitsu stuff. He signed up for a jiu-jitsu class in LA, but as soon as he went in, he realized that this wasn't the same groundwork he saw on TV. What they were doing was more akin to kung fu or karate. So he was pointed to another school in the valley, a school ran by the Machados, cousins of the Gracies. Although Eddie wanted to be polite and stayed for the class, he never showed up there again. Instead, he went chasing after the Machado school, searching for the real BJJ that he'd seen on the UFC. As he was walking into Jean Jacques Machado's school, he remembered his wrestling days and wondered about the nature of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
In the back of my mind, I was thinking, either it's primitive wrestling or super advanced wrestling.
Well, sure enough, in his first roll, a purple belt named Dave choked Eddie out 37 times. This proved to Eddie that BJJ was real, and it worked, just as he saw on TV. It also gave Eddie a goal.
Whoa, I want to get good enough to do what you did to me. That would be amazing. You did anything you wanted and I couldn't stop you.
Because he knew that if he could do that to someone who just walked in the door with zero experience, he could do that to 95% of people. Right away, Eddie Bravo was hooked. Eddie decided that BJJ was his thing, so he stopped going to other martial arts schools and focused fully on BJJ. Around this time, he actually got his blue belt from Jean Jacques himself, and his mind immediately began firing with innovation and pushing him to try new stuff. Once again, he remembered his wrestling days, and specifically a move called the guillotine. No, not that guillotine. In the BJJ sense, the name actually makes sense because you're attacking the person's neck. But no, I mean the wrestling guillotine, which attacks the spine. So Eddie started playing around with that, but BJJ already had a guillotine, so he had to rename it. He called it the Twister and used it so much that the Twister became the nickname of Eddie himself. Even early on in his BJJ journey, Eddie Bravo was thinking outside the box. After all, why not incorporate moves from other arts if they worked? Around 1999, Eddie got his purple belt and his mind started firing once again. Eddie started to show flashes of genius when he looked deeper into the art beyond the techniques and started to ask, how does this work? He realized that people relied on using the BJJ kimono, aka the gi, way too much. People use the gi to control the person on top, specifically by holding their lapel, which is around their neck, to control the top player's posture, and the sleeve to control the person's arm. In combination, the two stop the person from posturing up and striking you, which is cool and all, but how would it translate to the UFC, where no one besides Royler Gracie wore a gi and people can elbow you in the face? Remember, Eddie started practicing BJJ because of UFC 2, so having thoughts like these is absolutely normal. But these thoughts were more than just random curiosities for a creative like Eddie Bravo. Eddie trained more without the kimono rather than with the kimono. Not just because it was cool or because he wanted to stand out, but because that was how MMA was done. As he always thought MMA would be his backup career in case the music didn't take off.
If I lost my DJ job, I might do some MMA.
And Eddie believed that the way you train should be the same as the way you compete. Now, you'd think that this was obvious, but at the time, a lot of MMA fighters trained in the gi based on their coach's instructions. But between gi BJJ and MMA BJJ, there's a world and a half difference. The biggest difference was the gi jacket, which made it so easy to hold a person close to you and stop them from posturing up. So the little hamster in Eddie's brain started moving, thinking of ways to control posture without the gi, as well as a way to mitigate strikes, using mostly angles and some flexibility that he'd been religiously working on all the time. Eddie figured out that he could climb his leg really high up by the person's shoulder line, and using his hand to pull the leg down, he could stop people from posturing up. The pressure from the leg coming down right on the neck and shoulder area made it too difficult to just get up. As for strikes, he found a way to trap the arm of the opponent inside that same position, meaning that he now had a free arm to set up submissions, sweeps, and even strikes. He would name this position the rubber guard, and it would go on to define an entire section of the jiu-jitsu community. But before that, we have to revisit that historical match from before. The Abu Dhabi Combat Club, better known as ADCC, is the Olympics of no-gi grappling. It's the stage where the best of the best compete for the highest achievement in grappling. The stakes couldn't be higher, but they don't just let anyone in off the street. The event is so prestigious that local mini events are held to find the best of the best in each region. If you win, you get the golden ticket to the ADCC World Stage. In 2002, Eddie Bravo entered the North American ADCC trials, trying to punch his ticket to the ADCC. In his first match of the trials, he had Mark Ashton, who talked a lot prior to his match with Eddie, trying to get into his head with remarks of submitting him within a minute. Eventually, after having a few of these instances, Eddie had enough of it and outright asked Mark to warm up. Yes, he asked his opponent in one of the biggest events in their BJJ careers to warm up together. Who would ever accept such a silly request? Mark. That's who. Mark accepted Eddie's proposal for a quick warm-up, and they got to it. Eddie went hard, and he quickly realized that Mark had nothing for him. He couldn't defend Eddie's attacks and pass attempts. Skill for skill, Eddie was much better. Shortly after, their names got called to the mats to compete. They had just finished warming up together, and now they were about to compete. Surprise, surprise, Eddie submitted Mark. He progressed further into the tournament. His second match was a very tiring one for Eddie, as he could not submit the guy and expended a lot of energy going for his signature twister, but he managed to get the win on points. However, in the trials final, the favorite to win the entire tournament was waiting for him, Alan Theo. Alan had quickly won both of his matches and was coming in fresh and confident against the tired Eddie Bravo. Eddie had a strategy prior to his match with Alan. Taking into consideration just how tired he was, he would do the most unforgivable thing in BJJ: stall. Yes, the tired Eddie stalled the match until he could sweep Alan, trying to win on points. During the sweep though, Alan was able to catch a slick Darce choke on Eddie. Eddie felt like the choke was not set and would not submit him or put him to sleep. But his biggest worry was that Alan would take the opportunity and sweep Eddie back, making the points even. So he came up with a genius idea. He began making gurgling noises, making Alan think he was close to finishing the submission just to get his mind away from taking the points. I mean, surely no one would fall for that, right? Fake gurgling and choking noises. Well, Alan did. Time expired and Eddie won the match on points and sheer strategy alone. Eddie's trip to ADCC in Brazil the following year was secured, but Eddie quickly saw the reality of the situation. He was still just a brown belt, and ADCC was chock full of decade-long black belts, world champions, and BJJ professionals. Sao Paulo 2003, ADCC Worlds is about to start. Amongst the pool of black belt world champions and killers, there was a brown belt who expected so little from his performance that he basically accepted this to just be a free trip to Brazil. And there was a reason for this. His bracket was stacked with legends and really good black belts, and most of them were on Eddie's side of the bracket. Despite Eddie's losing mindset going into ADCC, he still tried his best in the matches. His first match was against the BJJ legend, Gustavo Dantas, a multiple-time world champion and a certified mental health coach. In their match, Eddie would work his unorthodox offense and put Gustavo in the truck position, which in itself leads to one of his favorite moves, the twister. However, at the time, under ADCC rules, spine locks were illegal, so Eddie was forced to switch up his offense and attack Gustavo's back, ultimately submitting him with a rear naked choke. At the time, this was considered a great upset. Eddie was a nobody coming from the United States, and furthermore, he was still just a brown belt. However, his detractors were very happy when they saw who his next opponent was. Eddie's second match was against Gracie royalty, Royler Gracie, a man who already won 3 ADCC championships in 1999, 2000, and 2001, plus many more black belt world titles. Outside of his competition accolades, the man's father was the founder of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Helio Gracie, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because Helio Gracie is also the father of Royler Gracie. He's also one of the most important figures in BJJ's early stages. Royler grew up in the most influential BJJ family. He started taking Jiu-Jitsu seriously when he was just 7 years old. Nearly every family member he had trained or coached Jiu-Jitsu. You couldn't ask for a better base if you aspired to be anything in the sport. Royler was surely about to put a stop to the Mexican brown belt ADCC run, right? Well, cast your mind back to the match we spoke about in the intro, where tradition met innovation? Yeah, well, this was that match. In this pocket of history, an entire timeline was created, and it all started with this match. Royler Gracie versus Eddie Bravo. In Brazil, on national television, people would watch, expecting to see the Gracie legend destroy the American. The match started, and Eddie employed his usual strategy of pulling people into his half guard, without a knee shield to protect himself. This was his lure, one that Royler took almost immediately. Eddie tried to set up one of his favorite moves, the lockdown, into a nasty submission called the electric chair, which involves ripping your crotch apart and breaking your knee. But Royler's base was just too strong and his pressure was immense. His head and arm control was extremely tight. He negated Eddie's favorite entries into positions and submissions. They spent nearly half of the match in the flat half guard position, with Royler constantly threatening to pass Eddie's guard. Eddie realized that he was playing a losing game, so he elected to change up his strategy and was able to tilt the legend over and almost get triangled for his trouble, but Royler bailed on the triangle and chose to stand up, pushing Eddie to his back, where Eddie would finally get the move that he's been looking for, his money move, the rubber guard. Unfortunately, Royler is able to completely negate it and progress towards a pass. Royler was up on points and time was ticking. Eddie only had time for one last attack. This was it, all or nothing, and Eddie chose his attack, a triangle from closed guard, something you learn on your first day of Jiu-Jitsu. As he stuffed Royler's wrist to set up his triangle, before Royler could even react, Eddie shot up a beautiful triangle, wrapping his leg around the back of the Brazilian's neck. The arena immediately exploded with people screaming, most of them against Eddie, encouraging Royler to escape. But as Eddie squeezed more and more, Royler was forced to tap out. Everyone in the arena was stunned. Eddie walked around with his arms up as if he was in a dream, until the reality finally set in and he collapsed to his knees. He couldn't contain the tears of joy. As he walked off the mat, overcome with joy, he was embraced by his best friend Joe Rogan and his coach Jean Jacques Machado, who took his black belt off of his own waist to give to Eddie Bravo. He was now a black belt after tapping out a BJJ legend and creating what just may be the biggest upset in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu history. Time stopped for a while. But the tournament went on, and Eddie had to finish his run in the ADCC World Championship, and now he had real momentum behind him. Could he pull off a perfect movie-like run to the title? Well, his semifinals match was against Leo Vieira, who was a legendary competitor and coach, known for his amazing high-level competition wins against the best 66-kilogram competitors of their time. This time, Eddie was really worried because Leo Vieira faced Jean Jacques Machado, Eddie's coach, in the previous ADCC, up a weight class at 77 kilos, meaning he would cut weight to gain an advantage over the poor 66ers of this ADCC. But what really worried Eddie was that Jean Jacques couldn't tap out Leo in their match. He beat Leo by points, 9 points to be exact, but he didn't submit him, whereas Jean Jacques Machado crushed Eddie when they trained together. During the match, Leo exposed Eddie's weakness, which was his lack of ability to play the other side. Usually, Eddie likes to play half guard on his right hip with his left leg up, but Leo was at the North American trials scouting his competition, and as he studied Eddie's game, he realized that Eddie never played guard on his left hip, so he kept pushing him to that side, which was very uncomfortable for Eddie. In the first half of their match, Eddie was mentally defeated. He wasn't even thinking about what was going on. His mind was racing, thinking about how he had just tapped out Royler Gracie and now he was looking like a chump, how no one would ever remember the Royler win because he got destroyed by Leo Vieira. But halfway through the match, he snapped out of it and decided to put up a fight and make Leo work for his win. Despite already being down on points, Eddie Bravo found his inner fire, but just as he got his confidence back during an explosive defensive movement, his rib popped. He immediately felt the sharp pain and even expressed the pain in the match, so his plan to put up a fight had been extinguished, but not fully. He was still set on not losing by submission, not tapping, which he managed to do, losing to Leo Vieira 16-0, but not tapping. He went home with his head held high, a not so brand new black belt, and a very sore rib. Life felt amazing. Life felt amazing until he stepped off the plane home. Then he realized that he was right back where he started, in a dead-end job that made him miserable. Despite his earth-shattering win, outside of the BJJ community, no one really cared. He was losing all hope and found himself at the lowest point of his life. A 33-year-old, he failed at being the musician he always wanted to be. He felt like a complete failure. His friends and family back home would ask him about how the music thing was going. Remember, he went to Hollywood to pursue a music career, not a sports one. People laughed at him. He got many I told you so's. One day, Eddie was talking to his friend, and his buddy kept trying to convince Eddie to quit the job that he hated and open up his own school. He even offered to buy the gym mats. He spoke about how this was the perfect time to open a school after an outstanding win and receiving a black belt. Everything seemed to align into a perfect opportunity, and as Eddie thought about it, it hit him. He would rather be poor and be happy doing what he loves, which is jiu-jitsu and music, than to make money at a job that made him miserable. So he did. He quit his job and opened his own school. Due to an injury, he couldn't participate in a 2005 ADCC, so he went all in on creating his school and setting up an empire, the 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu Empire, a super unorthodox style of jiu-jitsu with a heavy control leading to submission focus, as well as jiu-jitsu for MMA. Done only no gi, 10th Planet was among the first schools in the United States to abandon the gi entirely and put a particularly heavy focus on MMA, using Eddie's rubber guard, which was tailor-made for MMA, and later on adding a big dash of leg locks to the 10th Planet athlete arsenal. If you're wondering about the name, it comes from Eddie's other hobby besides BJJ and music, conspiracy theories. Lots and lots of conspiracy theories. And according to the ancient Sumerian text, there was a 10th planet in our solar system with a highly advanced civilization living on it. They called this planet Nibiru, and this was the initial name that Eddie chose for his school, but Joe Rogan thought it sounded too weird, so he suggested Eddie call it 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, and it almost immediately clicked. Eddie Bravo's personality attracted all sorts of creative, innovative and quirky characters to his school, which was not set up like any other BJJ gym. You didn't bow down to photos, you weren't forced to do certain actions simply because that was the tradition. Eddie allowed an open discussion. He would often make jokes and laugh alongside his students. He invited them to go out into other gyms and try different BJJ systems, something which is very rarely done. Eddie's style of teaching and running his gym attracted all sorts of diehard fans that really would never fit in with other traditional schools. 10th Planet was all about expression, community, and innovation, but it wasn't free of criticism. From the time Eddie tapped Royler, people always said the same thing. This was a fluke. It would never happen again, claiming that it didn't mean Eddie's system worked and could be used at the highest levels. The fact that Eddie was an American brown belt who defeated a Brazilian legend made the media in Brazil very hesitant to cover news about Eddie Bravo. He also opened an exclusively no-gi school, which at the time, for Brazilians, was like adding Dubai chocolate to an acai bowl. They saw it as you disrespecting the martial art itself and its Brazilian roots. Meanwhile, they failed to realize that Eddie's instructor, Jean Jacques Machado, was a Brazilian and cousin with the Gracies. Eddie just wanted to explore a different direction in the sport. And last but not least, Eddie and 10th Planet get a lot of hate for smoking weed. Yes, the school is well known to be pro-grass, and considering they were openly talking about weed in 2003, it left a bad taste in some people's mouths. It also sparked memes that hold strong even to this day. The skinny, flexible pot smoker who will try to submit you with the most pretzeling submission of all time. Although most of the hate came from traditionalists, usually Brazilian, who had a disdain for Eddie himself, there were some Americans who also did not approve of Eddie or 10th Planet and would mock students who came in wearing 10th P apparel or did any 10th P signature moves. But the hate and disdain was fairly short-lived. The 10th Planet network was strong and was able to survive the initial stages where the organization was at its weakest. In fact, not only did they survive, they started thriving. Little by little, more and more affiliates popped up all around the country, then a few in Canada, and before you knew it, there were 10th Planet schools all over the world. At the time of writing this, the 10th Planet website names 153 individual affiliate schools worldwide, including some in Thailand, South Korea, Dubai, Beirut, among many others. But Eddie Bravo was not done innovating and pushing the sport of Jiu-Jitsu forward. Eddie was never interested in watching athletes win by points or, God forbid, advantages. He always thought that those wins did not leave a satisfying answer on the table, and that the submission-only rule set was the one which clearly showed who was the better grappler. His vision to drive the sport forward was to bring excitement back, and what's more exciting than a submission? Well, we have submission-only matches for that, but what if the match ended without a submission? Well, Eddie had a few ideas about what to do in that case. Eddie, being the creative he is, thought up a brand new rule set, a submission-only rule set with no points, no advantages, or judges' decisions. But the real genius would shine in cases where there was no submission at all. Eddie would just put the two athletes in the most precarious positions in the sport until someone got submitted. Yep, if you two couldn't submit each other in the allotted time, Uncle Eddie would give you a slight push and put you either on the guy's back or in an armbar position, which he called spiderweb because 10th Planet. That would bring you just close enough to the submission without making it fully guaranteed. And the next round, your opponent would choose to start on your back or in the armbar position. This would guarantee high-octane action and submissions. This was his plan to drive BJJ forward into the mainstream. He foresaw a future where BJJ events would be televised right alongside NBA games and UFC fights. So, he approached shows and promoters with his new ideas. And of course, Eddie being the huge name that he is, Well, he got rejected by all of them. So he said, fine, I'll do it myself. And soon after, in 2014, we got to see the first edition of the Eddie Bravo Invitational, run by Eddie Bravo, alongside his partner Victor, featuring some 10th Planet Young Guns, but not only. This wasn't an in-house 10th Planet tournament, it was a real competition, and Eddie would prove that he had one of the most exciting grappling rule sets with EBI 1, the featherweights, which was a 16-man tournament featuring top featherweight competitors from various schools. In the finals, a 10th Planet superstar, Gio Freakazoid Martinez, faced off against one of the wackiest professional stranglers in all of BJJ, Jeff Glover. They had an amazing match, going into the overtime and really solidifying the overtime as a good idea when it comes to bringing excitement back into the sport. EBI is extremely well known for kickstarting the careers of top grapplers of our time, people like Gary Tonin, Eddie Cummings, Gordon Ryan, Craig Jones. EBI allowed them to show off their amazing skill sets in an exciting format, which opened a lot of doors for them early on. Gio was the winner of the first ever EBI, and it wouldn't be his last time. But the history of EBI is a video all in itself. It's also important to note that EBI is in partnership with the UFC, streaming on their UFC Fight Pass platform. So Eddie's big dream came true. A BJJ event was streaming right next to a record-breaking UFC event. With the success of EBI, Eddie's innovation didn't stop. He wanted to go back to his own roots and his initial interest, mixed martial arts, but not regular MMA. Instead, he wanted to test his MMA-targeted grappling techniques, such as the rubber guard, in a live competitive environment. So he started hosting matches where the grappling on the feet was as it always was, but once the action hit the ground, you were allowed to open palm strike each other. Initially it was fists, but later they changed it to open palm strikes. Combat Jiu-Jitsu was an interesting idea, as it eliminated stand-up striking, so it wasn't really an MMA match, but it allowed you to test how your BJJ style would work for an MMA fight or a self-defense situation. For the people in the BJJ community who are more interested in the real-life self-defense side of BJJ rather than sport jiu-jitsu, this was perfect. They got to see what techniques work to really neutralize strikes. For the format, Eddie took inspiration from Pancrase as well as the old Gracie challenges, which were set up by the Gracies for them to test their jiu-jitsu and flex on people that this martial art was the best. Ironically, this was the closest rule set to what the Gracies envisioned for the sport and did themselves. Eddie Bravo, the American stoner who was largely disliked by the Brazilians for what he did in 2003, was bringing traditional aspects of jiu-jitsu back, all while he was driving the sport forward. Eddie's interest in grappling for MMA made him a very sought-after coach, but not just for regular grapplers, but MMA fighters, high-level MMA fighters. Yes, way before Craig Jones made it cool, Eddie Bravo was in the corner of people like Ben Saunders, a UFC fighter known for having the first ever omoplata submission in the UFC. Ben has spoken about how much Eddie's system helped his MMA career. Another MMA star who was studying under Eddie was Alan Jouban, an exciting fighter and a 10th Planet black belt under Eddie himself. But probably the most well-known of Eddie's MMA pupils was Tony El Cucuy Ferguson. Yes, that Tony. The Tony that was supposed to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. The Tony that terrified the entire lightweight division. The Tony that was an interim UFC champion. And who was in his corner? Well, think about it. Who else would Tony listen to besides another quirky character much like himself? Eddie Bravo. Eddie not only cornered Tony in his interim championship win, but he also gave him a black belt. But this one was a bit more special than the others. Remember the belt Jean Jacques Machado took off his own waist to give to Eddie when he beat Royler? Well, Eddie would pass that black belt down to Tony Ferguson after he won an interim UFC title. But all while he was dealing with running his schools, all these new events, and coaching, one rematch was always in the back of his mind. After the 2003 ADCC, where Eddie Bravo triangle choked Royler Gracie, there were a lot of narratives going around. Some said that Eddie was a genius and a revolutionary to be able to submit a legend of the sport. Others, however, said that it was a fluke, nothing more than a lucky brown belt who caught one of the Gracies. It didn't mean anything. These negative comments got to Eddie, and he really wanted to prove that this was no luck. At first, he wanted to rematch Royler 2 years later after their initial match in the 2005 ADCC. However, after a hard training camp, Eddie would pop the same rib that he injured with Leo Vieira and had to pull out of the event. But as Royler also pulled out of the event in 2005, Eddie didn't really feel too bad about missing out, as he didn't really care about the title or competing at all. Actually, he just wanted to shut down the doubters. Ever since 2003, Eddie was asked numerous times about a second match with Royler. He always said he wanted to do it, but it would take a very long time before that happened. Metamoris 3, 2014. A decade after their initial match, the legendary rematch was set to take place. The rules? Submission only, 20-minute match. No points, advantages, or judges' decisions. Whoever submitted their opponent won. The long-anticipated rematch was here. We would finally find the answer. Was Eddie better, or was he just lucky? Right away, their match started exactly like their previous one. Eddie pulls half guard on his strong side, and Royler accepts it, choosing to work his passes off of that position. After a long, grueling battle in that position where both men were fighting for mere inches, Royler trying to progress a pass and Eddie setting up his unorthodox offense, eventually Eddie was able to get a solid catch on Royler's leg and set up one of his best submissions, the electric chair. But Royler would grit down and defend the submission itself, but he couldn't really stop Eddie from manipulating his weight and moving him around. After 18 minutes of hard fighting, Eddie finally finds the perfect position. Of course, in typical 10th Planet fashion, it is very difficult to describe what is happening, but I'll try anyway. This position is called the vaporizer. What it does is it crushes your calf, which is extremely painful. It also separates the knee joint and attacks it on multiple sides. Royler's knee joint would pop multiple times, indicating that his knee ligaments were tearing and he was visibly in immense pain. Having his leg bent sideways, Royler proved that he is a warrior, and he was able to somehow withstand the pain and choose to let a lot of his knee ligaments tear for 2 entire minutes. The match was ruled a draw. Although anyone who watches the match can tell you that Eddie won, Eddie loves the fact that it's technically a draw, since it sparks conversation. He didn't really win, but he won. And he won using the moves he developed with his students, proving that his system really works. Even a BJJ legend couldn't understand what was happening. Think about it. In 2014, Royler was 49 years old. You remember that we spoke about him training seriously since he was 7, and he couldn't stop Eddie. These positions were so weird and out of left field that he could not even recreate them. But that's where Eddie lives, not in familiar positions. He resides in the outskirts of the knowledge we have of Jiu-Jitsu. He is always pushing the boundaries of innovation further and further, never settling. Eddie Bravo has always been an outsider in Jiu-Jitsu. From the very start, he was showing his creativity in arts. He never walked the traveled path. He'd rather go out of everyone's comfort zone and explore what is possible, whether that be in Jiu-Jitsu, grappling events, or music. If you watch anyone talk about Eddie Bravo, they always have nothing but nice things to say about him. He created a home for all Jiu-Jitsu outsiders and allowed them to be themselves. 10th Planet students in general are extremely dedicated to the system and Eddie himself because they see pieces of themselves in him. No other BJJ coach at the time would explain how to do an armbar and also talk about his favorite speed metal song or his favorite horror movie. Eddie Bravo continues to expand his empire of 10th Planet affiliate schools all over the world, run his legendary events that kickstarted the careers of the top grapplers we know and love today.
What you got? Eddie Bravo's Jiu-Jitsu held you for this camp. I don't know Jiu-Jitsu. I know 10th Planet, bitch. Yeah!
The world owes a debt of gratitude to Eddie Bravo and what he has done for the BJJ community. Even if you never attempt a rubber guard in your life, this man's impact on the BJJ world is undeniable. He was always selfless with his ideas and wanted to give back to the community that allowed him to live a life he loves, traveling, teaching, and creating music. Before he set off for Hollywood, Eddie's uncle, Tony, told him that the odds of making it in music are 1 in a million, trying to get him to go to college. But Eddie, in typical Eddie Bravo fashion, replied,
I'm that 1 in a million. And he was like, oh my God, go to Hollywood. And I went.
The madman was right. He just got the industry wrong. Eddie Bravo's biggest lesson to us all is that we can think outside the box, be creative, pursue what makes us happy. No matter how weird it may be or if people don't like it, you never know where you can get a few quirky ideas. Just look into it. Thank you guys for watching. Before I let you go, I do have a question. What is the weirdest 10th planet position you've seen or done? Let me know down below. I do hope you enjoyed this video covering Eddie Bravo's legacy. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. Now go out there and try to beat a multiple-time ADCC champion. You never know. It might just work.
Goodbye.